The quarterly review had gone longer than planned. Outside, the late afternoon sun had dipped below the skyline, casting a golden hue that danced across the glass panels of the conference room. Inside, only 4 of us remained: the CEO, 2 senior managers, and me, Miratran, a strategy analyst barely into her 30s, trying to look more focused than I felt. The air was still, the kind of stillness that creeps in after hours of data and dialogue. Pages turned. Graphs were discussed. Someone asked a follow-up question. I half-registered the response, but my eyes drifted to Daniel Ward, the Director of Corporate Development. He was still presenting measured calm, one sleeve rolled just slightly higher than the other, collar undone, in that precise way that made it seem casual but deliberate. Like he knew the effect and didn't mind using it. I told myself I was just observing. That's what analysts do, right? But when I realized how long I had been watching him speak, not just listening but watching, I looked down sharply, feigning interest in my folder. Too late, because when I glanced up again, his eyes were on mine. Not accidentally, not questioningly, directly, as if he had felt it. The silent pull, the weight of unspoken attention, and responded in kind. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but something about it stayed. Minutes later, the meeting dissolved. Chairs scraped back. Few quiet goodbyes. I gathered my notes with trembling fingers, suddenly aware of every motion, every breath. In the hallway, I exhaled, notebook still clutched to my chest like a shield. Then his voice behind me. Low. Controlled. You looked at me longer than necessary. I turned. Slowly. He wasn't smiling. But something about his expression, curious, composed, certain, unsettled my balance. I thought your presentation was thorough, I said, aiming for professional, landing somewhere closer to nervous. He took 1 step forward. Not close enough to crowd me, but close enough that I could smell the faint trace of something, cedarwood maybe, or memory. That's not what I meant, he said quietly. I didn't know what to say, but I also didn't step away. That said more than words ever could. Later that evening, long after the building had emptied, I replayed that look in my mind, sharp, silent, and far too specific to be forgotten. I told myself it meant nothing, just a glance, just a pause, just tension imagined in an overworked mind. But deep down a whisper stirred. If it truly meant nothing, why do you still feel it? The rest of the office was beginning to dim. It was that in-between hour, when most people had left, and the silence began to settle into the walls. I walked toward the elevator, every step echoing louder than it should have. Behind me I heard him too, not rushing, just walking. Daniel. He didn't call out again. He didn't need to. I pressed the button and waited. The air felt heavier somehow, like the pause between 2 sentences you're too afraid to finish. When the elevator opened, I stepped in. He followed. No one else. Just us. The doors closed. We stood side by side, close but not quite close enough to touch. His hands were in his pockets. Mine were wrapped around my notebook like a lifeline. I told myself to breathe evenly, to stay calm, to act like this meant nothing. The elevator lit up, floor 17, my floor. Passed without stopping. I didn't move. Neither did he. We didn't look at each other. We didn't speak. But I felt it, that charged silence, thick with everything we weren't saying. The elevator slowed, stopped at floor 21. Not his floor, not mine either. He stepped out, didn't glance back, didn't gesture, didn't ask me to follow, and yet I did. Not because I had to, but because some part of me had already made the decision hours or maybe months before tonight. The hallway was dim, empty, the kind of quiet space that carries no consequences until it does. He walked down the corridor, turned at the very last door. A side meeting room. The kind without cameras, without bookings, just a long table. Closed blinds. One window overlooking the darkening city. He opened the door, didn't look over his shoulder, just walked in, and waited. I paused at the threshold, not because I was afraid, but because I knew whatever happened next would not be undone. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me, and the silence between us became something else entirely. The meeting room was dim.
No proyecte.
No documents, just shadows cast by the soft city lights filtering through the window blinds. He stood near the far side of the room, one hand still in his pocket, the other resting lightly on the edge of the table. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His presence filled the space between us. Unrushed, unassuming, but unmistakable. I stood near the door, unsure of what I was waiting for. An excuse? A reason to walk back out? But none came. Only the sound of the city below. And the silence between us stretching, thinning, until something had to give. He turned toward me, slowly. "I thought you'd hesitate," he said. His voice was low. Not teasing. Just honest. I swallowed. "I did." A breath. But then I didn't. The corner of his mouth lifted just barely. He took a step forward. Not dramatic. Not bold. Just one step closer. Enough to make my breath catch. The space between us began to shrink. Not because he reached for me, he didn't. But because the air itself seemed to fold inward. I could feel my heartbeat in my hands. He stopped just a pace away. We stood facing each other. No longer strangers in a meeting room. No longer two professionals exchanging polite nods. Just two people, aware. "I don't want to misunderstand this," I said quietly. "You're not," he replied. "I've seen how you look at me. And I know how I look at you." The truth of it hung there, heavy, undeniable. He reached out, but not toward me. Not yet. His fingers hovered for a moment, then gently brushed just beneath my chin, lifting it, guiding my eyes back to his. "I don't want to cross a line," he said. "Not unless you draw it first." Something in me softened, not because of the gesture, but because of the restraint. Because in a world full of moments that rush and blur, this one waited for me. And for the first time in a long time, I let it. He didn't move any closer. Not right away. His hand fell back to his side, and for a few long seconds we simply stood there, facing each other, listening to silence speak. And in that silence, I realized something. It wasn't tension I was feeling. It was stillness. That rare kind of stillness where nothing rushes, where even desire is quiet, not urgent, where presence becomes permission. I took one small step forward. The air changed. He noticed, but he didn't reach for me. Not until I nodded, barely visible, like the kind of yes only two people on the same frequency would understand. When his hand touched my arm, it was light, almost hesitant. A question. I answered by letting my shoulder relax beneath his fingers. A surrender not of control but of defense. He closed the space between us slowly. There was no chase in his motion, just a gravity that felt inevitable. His forehead rested gently against mine, not claiming, just aligning. Our breath synchronized without trying. Soft, calm, real. My eyes fluttered shut, and in the quietest moment of my adult life, I let go of the meetings, of the caution, of the rules I had wrapped around my heart like armor. He tilted his head slightly, and when his lips met mine, it wasn't fire. It was quiet, steady, like the first moment of rain after a long dry season. There was no hurry in it. Only a message passed between mouths that didn't need to speak anymore. "I see you. I want you to feel safe here." When the kiss broke, he didn't pull away. He stayed close, breathing with me, existing in the same unhurried space. I can stop, he whispered, almost more breath than sound. I opened my eyes, met his gaze, steady, patient, honest. You don't need to, I said. Not yet. And so we stayed there, not rushing, not unraveling, just suspended in the rare golden pause between two lives that knew they could no longer go back to before. Claire didn't remember what they said before she left, if they said anything at all. The door had closed behind her with a soft click, unremarkable, like any other door in the building. And yet, something inside her knew. She hadn't just walked out of a meeting room, she had stepped out of a moment that couldn't be undone. Outside, the air was cooler than she expected. The city buzzed beneath her steps. Taxis glided past. Neon signs flickered. Someone laughed across the street, but all she could hear was the memory of his voice. I can stop. And her reply, you don't need to. Not yet. She walked slowly, not to prolong the commute, but because her mind wouldn't walk faster than her breath. Each block brought a new thought. Each streetlight peeled back another layer of her still racing mind. What was that? A mistake? A beginning? A line crossed? Or something that had already been unraveling long before tonight? She didn't know, but it hadn't felt reckless. It had felt chosen, measured, and frighteningly real. When she reached her apartment, she didn't turn on the lights right away. She stood in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the city below. She set her bag down, removed her shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and exhaled slow and deep, as if her body had finally caught up to everything her heart had felt since that first glance in meeting room 4. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't ashamed either, just still with the weight of being seen. Still with the memory of lips that asked permission in every movement, still wondering if this would remain a secret memory, or if it had opened a door that would never quite close again. Not all turning points come with noise. Some arrive in silence, then echo for days. The office looked exactly the same the next morning. Fluorescent lights, tapping keyboards, paper cups filled with lukewarm coffee. Conversations about nothing important, but inside her, everything had shifted. Claire sat at her desk, trying to focus on the report in front of her, trying to remember how it felt to be ordinary again. She had done everything right. Arrived on time, smiled politely, nodded through her team's weekly stand-up, but something beneath her skin wouldn't sit still.
10:43 Uhr morgens.
Her email pinged, just once, no subject line.
No greeting.
Just one line, from Julian Ward. That silence between us last night wasn't empty. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't know what to say, not because she was afraid, but because he was right. Last night hadn't ended with a dramatic confession or a long embrace. It had ended with stillness. Pause long enough to feel like goodbye, but warm enough to still feel like an open door. She read the message again. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even an invitation. It was simply a truth, one he knew she would understand without needing more words. Claire closed the message, didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she stared out the window beside her desk. The world moved as it always had, but she didn't. She just sat there, heart full of something that hadn't been named, but had very much been felt. And somehow she knew this wasn't over. Not the silence, not the glances, not whatever it was that lived quietly between them. By mid-afternoon, Claire had read the same paragraph in her report 3 times. She wasn't tired, but her focus had wandered to that message, that glance, that touch that hadn't crossed a line, but had never quite stepped back from it either. The screen in front of her blurred slightly. She blinked. You okay? Claire turned too quickly to see Sophie, the data analyst who sat across from her. holding a half-empty mug and a look of soft curiosity. "I'm fine," Claire said, adjusting her posture. "Just deep in spreadsheet land." Sophie tilted her head. "That kind of deep doesn't usually look like that." She nodded toward Claire's keyboard, where her hands hadn't moved in 5 minutes. Claire offered a laugh. "Too light. Too practiced." Sophie didn't push, but she didn't leave either. After a moment, she sat on the edge of Claire's desk, voice quieter. "You've seemed somewhere else lately," she said. "Everything okay?" Claire hesitated. For a moment she considered brushing it off, saying she was just tired, that it was nothing, that work had been demanding, but something in Sophie's tone, gentle not intrusive, made her pause. "It's just," Claire began, then stopped. "How do you explain the weight of a glance? The way silence can shift the shape of your entire week? The impossibility of acting normal when something unspoken is living just beneath your skin?" "I'm fine," she repeated, softer this time, more honest. Sophie studied her face for another second, then just nodded, slid off the desk, and walked away, leaving behind only the faint scent of cinnamon tea and the feeling of having been seen, even slightly. Claire returned her eyes to the screen, but her thoughts didn't follow, because in Sophie's gaze, there was something she hadn't expected: recognition, not judgment, not curiosity, just a quiet understanding, as if Sophie too had once stood in a room where a glance meant something that couldn't be explained with words. She waited until the office thinned out, waited until the clicking of keyboards turned into coat zippers and elevator dings. Then she rose, calm on the outside, pulse tapping restlessly beneath her sleeves. She took the long hallway, bypassing the elevator, choosing the stairs instead. A few more moments of breath, a few more seconds to prepare. When she reached room 21B, the door was already slightly ajar. She knocked once before stepping in. Julian was standing near the window, hands in his pockets, city lights just beginning to blur behind him.
No presentation.
No documents, just 2 chairs. And space, a silence that had history. "You didn't reply," he said, voice even. "To the message?" Claire asked. He nodded. She walked farther in, letting the door close softly behind her. "I didn't know what to say," she admitted. "You were right. But that doesn't mean I knew what to do with it." Julian turned to face her. There was no frustration in his eyes.
No expectation.
Only quiet knowing. "I called this meeting," he said, "because I don't like unfinished things." Claire folded her arms, not in defiance, but to keep her hands from giving her away. "Some things aren't meant to be finished," she said. "They just happen, then linger." Julian stepped forward, not too close, but enough to shorten the silence between them. "I've thought about that moment every day since," he said. "Not because it was reckless, but because it was careful. Too careful." She looked up. "You mean, because we didn't go further?" "No," he said simply. "Because we didn't talk about it." The room held stillness again. Not heavy this time, just present. A shared pause between 2 people who knew exactly where the edge was, and how far they'd already walked along it. Claire took a slow breath. "I'm here now," she said. "So talk." The hum of the city beyond the window was faint, muted, like it too was holding its breath. Julian stood quiet for a moment, as if weighing which truth to give her first. Then, without looking away, he spoke. "The night I kissed you wasn't the first time I thought about it." Claire's breath caught, not from shock, but from the way his voice sounded just then. Unpolished, unprotected, real. "It wasn't even the first time I imagined what it would feel like to stand in this room with you and say nothing, because everything had already been said in silence. He ran a hand through his hair. His calm, composed shell, just slightly fractured now. I didn't plan this, Claire, he continued softer. I didn't want to blur lines. I've always prided myself on keeping them clear. She didn't interrupt, because something about the way he said her name made her want to hear every word. But you walked in and without trying, you made every room feel different. Less strategic. More human. You made me notice things I'd stopped letting myself feel. He stepped back, as if needing space from his own confession, and that scared me. Claire's voice when it came was quiet. Because of the risk? Julian shook his head. Because of the truth. Because once I let it exist, even for a second, it became something I couldn't ignore. And now it's the only thing I hear, even in silence. The pause that followed didn't feel tense. It felt full, like the space between two thoughts just before they meet. Claire took a small step forward, not closing the distance but acknowledging it. What do we do with that truth now? Julian met her gaze. We don't rush it. We don't define it in one sentence. But we don't pretend it never happened either. They stood in that room, two people who had spent weeks orbiting each other without ever calling it gravity. And now, the pull was no longer quiet. It was real and spoken. The room was still. Neither of them moved. Not toward each other. Not away. Just still. As if both knew that once someone reached for the door, something between them would change. Claire's arms stayed loosely crossed. Not defensive, not closed. Just holding herself still. Julian stood by the table now, watching her with the kind of look you don't give unless you're sure it won't be misunderstood. We should leave separately, Claire said. Her voice wasn't cold, just careful. He nodded once. Not offended. Not surprised. You go first, he replied. I'll stay a few more minutes. She walked to the door slowly, aware of how quiet her steps were. The room didn't echo, but inside her something did. She paused at the doorframe, didn't turn all the way back. Just enough. I don't regret that night, she said. But I'm not sure what it means yet. Julian's reply was simple. It doesn't have to mean everything. Just something. Their eyes met for one last moment. Measured mutual knowing. A gaze that didn't ask for a promise, only recognition of what was real, even if it wasn't ready. Claire stepped out. The door clicked behind her, quiet but final. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel like she was holding her breath. She just exhaled. The soft click of the door echoed more than it should have. Julian didn't move at first. He stayed exactly where he was, one hand resting against the edge of the table, the other in his pocket. Still. Listening, not for footsteps, but for what was left behind. The silence she carried with her. The one that stayed in the room after she was gone. He glanced at the chair she had occupied. There was nothing left on it. No folder.
No pen.
No trace of her. And yet the room felt full, like something had finally been acknowledged, and in doing so had left a shadow behind. He walked to the window. The city blinked in the distance, ordinary and unaware. People heading home. Buses pulling away. Office lights switching off. It struck him how unchanged everything looked. And yet inside him something had shifted. Not loudly, but permanently. He took a breath. Steady. Long, intentional. Then, almost without thinking, he pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over her name in the message list. There were no drafts. Only the single message he had sent the day before. That silence between us last night wasn't empty. She hadn't replied. He hadn't expected her to. But tonight, after everything, they were no longer pretending silence was safe. He typed slowly, then paused, deleted the words, typed again. Take your time.
No puntuación. No signature.
Just 3 words. He didn't hit send. Not yet. He just stood there, thumb hovering, heart quiet, waiting. Because sometimes connection isn't in the reaching. It's in the waiting. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. Not from regret. Not from excitement. Just restlessness. The kind that lingers when you've opened a door inside yourself. And now every room beyond it feels unfamiliar. She sat by the window, wrapped in a soft blanket, the city pulsing quietly outside. She opened her laptop, not for work, not for email, just a blank document. The cursor blinked, waiting, patient, like Julian had been. She began to type. This isn't for you. Not because I don't want you to read it, but because I don't know what I'd want you to say. Tonight, when I stood at the door, I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask what you think about when you're quiet. I wanted to know if the weight I feel in my chest is mirrored in yours. But instead, I said something safer. Because safer is what I've always known. She paused, stared at the words, then continued. I don't regret that night, but I think I regret how quickly it became something I had to carry alone. We don't talk about it, not really. We orbit it. We nod to it in coded glances, and maybe that's what it has to be. But I hope it isn't. Claire reread the words, felt every syllable pulse in her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just saved the file, closed the laptop, and sat there breathing quietly, still alone, but somehow not lonely. The next morning felt strangely ordinary. Claire moved through her routine like muscle memory, coffee, coat, elevator, polite greetings. No one looking at her differently, no hint that anything had shifted, but inside her something had. She still felt the echo of her words from the night before. The one she'd written and locked away in a folder marked nothing but the date. She hadn't sent anything. And yet, when she unlocked her screen at 9:07 a.m., there it was. One new message, from Julian Ward. Subject line blank.
No greeting.
Just 3 words. Take your time. That was it. No questions.
No invitation.
No suggestion of what she should feel. Just permission to feel what she did. Claire read the line once, then again. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble, but something settled. Not in decision, but in recognition. He knew she wasn't ready, and he wasn't asking her to be. She didn't reply, not because she didn't want to, but because some messages don't ask for answers. They simply arrive to say, I see you. Still. And I'll be here. Whether you speak now or later. Claire leaned back in her chair. The morning sun was sliding across the far wall of her office. She closed her eyes for a moment and just let it warm her face. Sometimes the most romantic thing isn't pursuit. It's patience. It was raining, not heavily. Just a steady rhythm against the windows that made the office feel smaller. Softer, more honest. Claire had stayed late, not because she had to, but because she needed to. Somehow, the quiet after hours gave her the space to think, to breathe, to feel without being watched. She hadn't spoken to Julian in days, but he hadn't disappeared. He had stayed present, distant but not absent, visible but not pressing. And there was something about that restraint that felt more meaningful than any long message could have. Just after 6 p.m., she packed up her things, headed to the elevator, and as the doors slid open, there he was, Julian, also alone, also at the end of his day. Their eyes met.
No surprise. No alarm.
Just quiet recognition. Hi, he said. Not we need to talk. Not about that night. Juste y. Claire stepped in. Nodded. Hey. The doors closed. The elevator began to hum. For a few seconds they said nothing. Then, it's okay if this never becomes something, Claire said. But I think it already is something. even if we never name it. Julian didn't look surprised. Some things don't need names, he said. They just need care. She glanced sideways. He was smiling just slightly, the kind that meant he wasn't asking for more than what she had already given. The elevator stopped at floor 1. He held the door for her. She stepped out, then paused, looked back. Do you want to walk out together? He didn't hesitate. Only if you want to.